Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into something pretty chilling, really disorienting. It's called sleep paralysis. Imagine this. You wake up, your mind totally clear, you know exactly where you are, you can see your room, maybe glance around with your eyes, but your body is just frozen. Still. You can't move a muscle, can't speak, can't even twitch a finger. Now, while only a small percentage of people suffer from this regularly, it's something any one of us could potentially experience. You're trapped, somewhere between dreaming and being awake. And here's the kicker. While it's not dangerous in itself, sleep paralysis is often, very often, accompanied by extremely realistic and frankly terrifying hallucinations. So just think about that for a second. What would that actually feel like? Trapped in your own bed, totally conscious, while something unimaginable appears, and you can do absolutely nothing but watch.
It's really crucial to grasp how intensely real these experiences feel. They're not like fuzzy dreams. That realism, it can have a significant psychological impact. It makes it hard to separate from, waking reality. Sometimes, rarely, it can even trigger actual physical stress responses. And I should mention, while you might hear about ways to try and induce sleep paralysis, it's really, really not recommended. Precisely because these experiences can be so intense, potentially quite traumatic.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this a bit. We've got the basic feeling down, but what do people actually see? What do they feel when they're stuck like that? You mentioned hallucinations, and yeah, while a tiny few report like pleasant visions, the overwhelming majority, it's horrifying stuff. We're talking ghosts, demons, sometimes even stories of alien abductions. It runs the gamut, and it's not just seeing things. People describe these really disturbing physical feelings, too, like a crushing weight on their chest, making it hard to breathe. Plus this overwhelming, just pure wave of fear and dread. We actually have a first-hand account here from someone who used to get this monthly. They describe a typical episode, usually sleeping on their back, seeing the room clearly, but totally unable to move. And these dark figures would often appear just in the periphery of their vision. Absolute terrifying. To break out of it, they literally had to scream themselves awake. It would start as this low growl, apparently, and build up into a full scream. Their partner actually confirmed this. They could hear it happening.
Yeah, and what's fascinating there is how consistent those initial details are. Across so many different accounts, the paralysis itself, seeing shadowy figures, that feeling of pressure, it's a common pattern. It really grounds the terror in a shared physiological state. See, during REM sleep, our brain naturally paralyzes our voluntary muscles. It's called rematonia. It stops us from, acting out our dreams. With sleep paralysis, you essentially wake up mentally, but your brain hasn't flipped the switch to turn off that paralysis yet. So your mind's online, aware, but your body's still stuck in that dream mode immobility. Kind of sets the perfect stage for these terrifying hallucinations to overlay onto your real surroundings.
Okay, that makes sense physiologically. But here's where this particular person's story gets, even more unsettling. They shared two specific incidents. In one, a dark figure leaned in and whispered something right into their ear. And the really weird part, it was apparently some kind of nursery rhyme, but spoken in Mandarin, Manda, they called it, and they could only hear it in that one ear, the one being whispered into. But the absolute most terrifying one for them, they described being surrounded by several dark figures who were stabbing them in the abdomen. They said the pain felt so incredibly real, so intense, that they actually went to the hospital the next morning because, get this, their appendix had burst. Now that sounds almost unbelievable. Can a hallucination actually cause something like that?
That is an incredibly powerful account, and it really underscores the extreme realism, the psychological weight these episodes carry. Now, the sensation of pain during a hallucination can be absolutely vivid, indistinguishable from real physical pain. The mind is powerful. However, a hallucination itself, the mental event, cannot physically rupture an organ like an appendix. That's not how it works. It's far, far more probable that the individual already had an underlying medical issue, like appendicitis starting. And the intense stress, the perceived trauma, and the very real feeling of pain during the sleep paralysis episode either coincided with it, or perhaps even exacerbated the symptoms of the pre-existing condition. The mind's power to generate sensation is profound, yes, but it doesn't translate to direct physical organ damage like that.
Right, okay. That distinction is really important. The perceived pain versus actual physical cause. Let's shift to another account now. This one focuses on what they called sheer unimaginable terror. For this person, sleep paralysis consistently involves some kind of pitch black creature. They described it as, and this is quote, 100 times more terrifying than anything you could possibly imagine. You're just lying there, fully conscious, seeing this thing, knowing you can't move, can't escape, nothing to do but just hope it stops. And it's incredibly disorienting too, because you might be trying to move, trying to speak, but you don't know if you're actually doing it. or if it's all still part of this half dream state. Either way, it takes this monumental effort just to try and break free.
And it really brings up a key point. How deeply can the mind blur that line between what's perceived reality and what's a hallucination? Especially when the body is genuinely physically incapacitated. The brain is trying to make sense of this bizarre state, being awake but paralyzed. So it often generates these figures, these scenarios. And the content of these hallucinations, it frequently taps into really primal fears, fear of the dark, of suffocation, intruders being watched, stuff that's deeply embedded in our survival instincts.
Absolutely. And here's a really chilling example from that same person. They remember waking up paralyzed, trying desperately to call out, and then they heard their brother's voice clear as day from the other side of their bedroom door, asking if they were trying to talk to him. But here's the thing. Their brother didn't live with them, didn't live anywhere near them, but in that moment it felt absolutely real. It shows how convincing the auditory hallucinations can be too, not just the visual ones. Then there's another story, this one from a friend of someone who shared their experience. They described a weird man hobbling into the room. So they wake up, paralyzed, see this man kind of shuffle or hobble next to the bed, and then disappear into their blind spot, just out of sight. Imagine lying there, frozen, knowing something is right beside you but you can't see it. After waiting in just pure fear for a few minutes, the man suddenly pops his face right up close, directly in front of their head, and he was covered in blood. Just that sudden, gruesome reveal. When your brain is already primed for terror. Okay, moving to another account, and this one is particularly harrowing because it involves a medical condition, sleep apnea, getting tangled up with the sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
This really intensified the fear of suffocation. This person described lying on their couch, maybe dozed off, and suddenly realizing they couldn't move. Then they heard their back door being forced open. They heard footsteps, hurried ones, crossing the kitchen linoleum, then onto the hardwood floor in the dining area, getting closer and closer to the living room where they were trapped. They couldn't move, couldn't make a sound, couldn't yell. They said they regained consciousness just at the last possible second before they likely would have suffocated because of their sleep apnea. They mentioned this happens with alarming frequency, like 50 to 70% of the time if they pass out drunk on the couch, and pretty much 100% if they end up sleeping on their back. And they shared this really deep fear that someday they'll actually die like that, not from a real intruder, but, quote, dreaming of my end and then realizing it while I'm suffocating. They said the whole thing has made them nuts.
Yeah, connecting that to the broader picture, when you have a genuine physiological threat like sleep apnea interacting with sleep paralysis, it just amplifies the terror exponentially. It completely blurs the line between a real medical danger, the lack of oxygen, and a perceived supernatural threat, the intruder hallucination. It makes the whole experience profoundly more terrifying. And factors like sleep deprivation, alcohol use, irregular sleep schedules, those are well-known triggers that can definitely make these episodes more likely or more intense.
That overlap is truly frightening. Okay, now for an experience that involves, well, both sleep paralysis demons and, surprisingly, a guardian angel. The demon visions they described were fairly typical, shadowy figures often standing over the bed or near the bedroom door, but the worst one they experienced, they were lying on their side, back facing the bedroom door, and they felt someone get into bed behind them. Under the covers, this thing put an arm around their waist, cuddled right up against them. They could feel its breath in the back of their neck. They described the sensation as feeling like being cuddled by a skeleton with claws. For about half an hour, they said, just lying there, frozen, trying desperately not to panic. Apparently, this was only their second or third time experiencing sleep paralysis, so they were already terrified. Then the thing moved even closer, as if to kiss them behind the ear. And then the horrifying climax, and whispered, "Not yet. You're not ready yet. I'll come back when you are." They said it sounded both disappointed and excited. They interpreted it as a promise, like it would return when they were actually dying. Which, understandably, scared the fucking shit out of me. But then, contrast that with this other weird experience they had. This involved what they termed a sleep paralysis guardian angel. This happened after about 18 months of having these episodes pretty regularly, so they could usually recognize the feeling when it started. This time, they initially braced for the usual demon, but when they really looked, they saw a man kneeling beside their bed. And he was smiling. Not, they emphasized, a creepy smile. More like a parent coming in to check on their kid, was how they put it. He was dressed distinctively, apparently in a 50s-style suit and hat. He didn't say anything, but this person got this strong feeling, this sense from him that everything was okay, that he was there to look after them.
It is fascinating, isn't it? That while these deeply disturbing, terrifying experiences really dominate the accounts we hear, sleep paralysis can manifest across a wider spectrum. These more benign or even comforting hallucinations, though definitely less common, they really highlight the mind's incredible capacity for creation, even under conditions of, extreme perceived stress. It does make you wonder how much our own internal state, our expectations, maybe even our subconscious hopes, might influence the actual content of these dreamlike intrusions into wakefulness.
That's a really interesting point. Now, let's hear from someone who experiences this with alarming regularity now. Quote, almost every night, even during the day when I nap. For them, it often starts with a feeling, like being stared at from the closet, or seeing shadows darting around, sometimes hearing a deep voice speaking just gibberish. Then the physical part kicks in. They break out in a sweat, become completely immobile. After a bit, this heavy weight presses down on their chest and arms as if someone is sitting on me. And then it escalates further. They feel freezing cold hands start to choke them. They try desperately to thrash, to scream for help, but all that comes out are these little whimpers. This happens so often it's made them afraid to sleep. And they added this one chilling detail. I swear one time my pillow was being used to suffocate me with.
What's particularly striking there is the clear escalation within the hallucination itself. It moves from passive observation being watched to active, physical assault being sat on, choked, even suffocated with a pillow. It really underscores the profound psychological toll that these repeated, inescapable feeling experiences can take, especially when the brain is consistently finding itself in this vulnerable, mixed state of consciousness.
Absolutely relentless. Okay, here's another terrifying one. From someone who described themselves as new to this thing and was very sleep deprived at the time. They were just napping at a friend's house. Suddenly, their head felt strange. Like a power outlet was being uploaded into it, is how they put it. Weirdly, they felt they had some control over it based on their thoughts. But then they forced their eyes open and saw what looked like a woman standing near the door. This woman then got down on all fours and crawled onto the bed towards them. She was described as hideous and seemed to be decaying right in front of me, just visually horrific. Then came the physical sensation, which sounds incredibly disturbing. She started by slowly, lightly rubbing their cheek, but this quickly became faster, more forceful coloring, they said. And then the quote is, she fucking reaches into my chest and rips my heart out. The vividness, they said, was extreme. It felt so real that it jolted them, forced them to move, and they woke up screaming, understandably, physically and mentally shaken. Wow. So with all these intense, often violent experiences, what does this mean for people long term? Our final account is from someone who, interestingly, used to kind of like sleep paralysis, but not anymore. Back in college, they once hallucinated a mouse ran over their body, which, they kind of dismissed at the time. Messy dorm room, maybe plausible, but then it started escalating into something much more terrifying. They began having trouble breathing during an episode. They managed to look down at their body and saw a very large black snake wrapping itself around my torso, constricting them. They swore it felt so fucking real, described it as by far the most vivid episode they'd ever had. When they finally snapped out of it, they were screaming. Their roommates were nearby playing video games and got totally freaked out. They jumped up, still terrified, tried to explain what had just happened, only to have their roommates look at them like I was crazy. Their coping mechanism now, if they feel an episode starting, that initial weird sensation, they force themselves to wake up immediately. They don't let it take hold.
And that last account really highlights a common coping strategy, recognizing those early warning signs, that onset feeling, and actively trying to break the cycle before the full paralysis and hallucinations kick in. For many people, simply understanding the underlying physiology, knowing it's REM atonia bleeding into wakefulness, not a ghost, can actually reduce some of the fear. It demystifies it, right? Turns it from a supernatural assault into, essentially, a temporary glitch in the sleep-wake cycle. The terror feels real, absolutely, but that knowledge can offer a bit of power, a way to regain some sense of control over these deeply unsettling experiences.
These stories, they really paint a picture, don't they? The truly terrifying nature of sleep paralysis and how thin that veil between our dreams, our nightmares, and what we perceive as solid reality can become. When your mind is alert but your body's offline, the things that can crawl out from the subconscious, well, they can feel astonishingly, brutally real.
Absolutely. Yeah. And while the experiences themselves are internal, generated by the brain, their impact is undeniably real. It's lasting. It really does raise profound questions about the resilience of the human mind, How do we cope when faced with terror that feels so vivid, so inescapable, generated from within our own heads during our most vulnerable state?
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. If you ever find yourself lying there, frozen, and see that figure in the corner of your room, remember, it's likely just your brain playing tricks. Or perhaps these creatures lurking in the shadows of our minds just want us to think they're not real. Or maybe, just maybe, they offer a strange glimpse into something deeper, something about our consciousness or the raw nature of fear itself. If you found this exploration into the shadows interesting, please do support our channel, like this video, share it, and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating and sometimes, pretty terrifying topics. Thanks for joining us.